You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's Intelligence-Z Optimization and Transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in mainframe DevOps, data, operations, security, and cloud. You've never mainframed like this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Mainframe. I'm Matt Dallaire. Today, we're focusing on the banking, financial services, and insurance industries, or BFSI, looking at industry trends, challenges, regulations, and more, and how these relate to mainframe transformation within these organizations. Joining me for today's discussion are Intellyx Principal Analyst and CTO Eric Newcomer, BMC Area Director Duncan, BMC Sales Director Ted Bakon, and BMC Vice President of Solution Marketing Management, Priya Doty. Eric, Duncan, Ted, Priya, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks very much.
Eric, I'm going to step out of the way and let you lead the discussion, but to help set the table, what are the top trends you're seeing in the banking, financial services, and insurance industries today, and how are they affecting not just mainframe workloads, but the role of the platform in these organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I spent a lot of time working for Credit Suisse and Citigroup, where we had a lot of mainframes. And currently, I see a lot of interest in generative AI. That's kind of probably the biggest top line concern that I hear from folks that I previously worked with. But of course, for many years, there's also been a drive to put a lot of APIs, enable APIs on mainframes for integration, for mobile apps, for web apps, for customer experience purposes, for banking as a service, for embedded finance, for open banking. There's really a lot of reasons why the mainframe is coming back into view in these organizations. Another big one is cloud computing. When I was at Citibank, we were doing a lot of movement of data from on-premise to the cloud to do analytics. Now I'm sure they're doing AI work there as well. So it's become a kind of an integrated world. My role at Citibank and at Credit Suisse was the head of architecture, or you could call it CTO, a divisional CTO, reporting to divisional CIOs. And my role was really to help modernize applications across the board. I started cloud migration as well in the institutional bank at Citi for similar reasons, that we needed capabilities that we didn't have in a current environment to meet new business objectives. But as we did so, we found out that the mainframes, which were running core transaction processing applications, core banking, payment systems. These applications, when I first got there, we sort of had these guys are in the back room. They're solid. Don't touch them. They're working. Whatever you want to do it around them. And a lot of these new trends came in around mobility, a digital transformation, the fintech disruption, AI availability, the cloud disruption. We started to look at the mainframe to say, what is the right role for them in this ecosystem? How do we get them involved? How do we take advantage of those, capabilities that's kept them running all these years so successfully, and include that in these new trends? So I see a lot of new trends around modernization, which was, one of the main jobs I was working on. I see a lot of trends around improved security, regulatory compliance. At Citibank, we have branches in 90 countries, all of those countries were interested in regulating banks. And this was, a huge chore. But all of these things would just bring these mainframes out of, what was at one time kind of a back room or back office into the forefront, and started us looking at ways to make sure we could take advantage of those great capabilities and see how we can include them in these trends. Priya, I ask you, what are you seeing? You've just recently done a survey on these
Yeah.
topics.
Eric, it's interesting. So we run a survey every year at BMC called the Annual Mainframe Survey. We ran the 19th survey this year. And what we found is, we had stats, general stats, but we also did a click down into the financial services area for the respondents who mentioned that was their background. And it's interesting because if you look at it, you mentioned 90 countries and having regulations that you had to handle in 90 countries. No surprise, compliance and security is the top priority, for these companies by a large margin. After that comes things like cost optimization, application modernization, which you mentioned, is also rising in terms of priorities that banking and financial services firms have. But then keep going. So you mentioned generative AI. and AI. That's another challenge that customers are talking about. And the way they're talking about it is, I'm having trouble with staffing and skills. How do I manage the retirements? They're talking about enhancing their ability to automate activities so that they're being more efficient. And then probably most interesting, the last kind of top priority that they had was around AI ops. And AI ops in particular, again, Eric, at the top of the call, you kind of mentioned that you're seeing a lot of interest in Gen AI. AI ops actually increased very significantly in terms of interest levels over just in the last year. And if you click down on that, one of the things that customers are really interested in is leveraging Gen AI alongside classic AI ops and AI ML, to really harness the power of what we call hybrid AI. So any surprises in there for you?
No, I think, I left the banking world a few years ago, and now I'm doing analyst work. So I'm not on the ground in the banks anymore around the generative AI, which is something new that came up. I have talked with several former colleagues, and I think they're all really, really interested in figuring out how to automate classic business operations better using AI. And I think a phrase that kind of resonates across the industry is taking some of the cognitive load out of these activities that have been so manual intensive, scrolling through all kinds of data. And I see that's in the cybersecurity world as well, where there's so much data, so many alerts, so much data coming in through monitoring and observability that you really need AI to distill this into actionable insights. I hear a lot about that. Duncan, maybe I could turn it over to you. What are some of the things people, that used to be in my shoes that are currently in the financial services institutions working with mainframes and mobile apps and cloud? What are some of the things they can do to help address some of these priorities?
Sure. I guess there's so much going on. I mean, I think there's been a shift in user behavior as well in the last few years, particularly after the pandemic. I think the use of cash has diminished in a lot of countries, and so consequently the use of payments has increased even more. Payments has been on a steady growth, but it's growing even faster now. At the same time, some countries have mastered faster payments, and so payments are real time. Other countries and some organizations haven't quite got there yet, and so there's a multi-tier kind of performance out there. Some countries you tap using your card to pay for something, or you use Apple Pay, and your phone or your watch gives you an alert the same second to tell you that transaction has happened successfully. So banks have very little time to react and to make sure that everything's running smoothly. And that puts a higher demand on the systems. Obviously, mainframes are a big part of that. Most payments start or end on a mainframe. And that's increased the requirements for having better cybersecurity controls, better fraud prevention, better money laundering controls and processes, and higher performance. And I think maybe 10, 20 years ago, when people used payments, they were for bigger items, a major purchase, whereas now I think the median size of a payment is the price of a cup of coffee. So people are using payments for everything, and I don't think that trend's going to diminish. And I think it's just typical of the sort of the performance expectations that consumers are putting upon the banking industry. They expect everything to work to perfection, the same way they experience technology at home, where they're watching Netflix or they're using their iPad. They get very high quality performance all the time, and they expect the financial institutions that they are supported by to perform as well. So there's a big onus on us to make sure that we can provide the services and the software to keep those banks running really well, keep them secure, keep the bad actors out, and make sure that they're constantly innovating and offering really good quality services.
Well, maybe I'll bring in Ted on this.
Well, I would add, just recently, a bank here in the U.S. experienced an outage of their payment system for a number of days.
Yeah.
And, root cause has not yet been determined or shared, but the implication is pretty significant for people who rely on that capability every day to pay their mortgage and pay their car payment and pay their rent. And the implication of the importance has never been greater. And I appreciate you mentioning that, Duncan.
Ted, you said a bank. And for the listeners, I just want to say BMC works with 22 of the top 25 banks in the US and 20 of the top 25 banks globally. So when Ted says bank, you could just imagine who that might be. There's, we have very broad coverage across that industry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, seconds of downtime is a painful event in the financial industry, and minutes is a very painful event. So days is unthinkable. And there are regulations now which rightly point to this kind of requirement. So in Europe, we have something called DORA, which is the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and we have a similar version in the UK. And I know that in the US, you have similar regulations aiming to achieve the same objectives. And that came about, I think DORA was prompted by a major failure over here in Europe, where a bank was down for a couple of weeks. And when that happens, you've got to question, why haven't these organizations invested in the systems and processes to make them robust? And I think these regulations are a really good thing, because they're forcing people to stress test their infrastructures, make sure that they have backups, multiple backups, and not just the ability to recover fast, but the ability to recover at all. And in cybersecurity, things like ransomware, probably everybody's worst nightmare. Something takes you out and you can't recover. That's it is a failure if you can't recover very quickly. So these things are so critical.
Absolutely. And I take your point. A very big trend has been higher volume, lower value payments over the last few years. And that's made a big impact on all the IT systems. Having talked about all these challenges, can we talk a little bit about what are some of the ways that organizations could align their strategies around the mainframe to help address some of these strategies? Duncan, I'll put you on the spot again on this one to
Yeah.
start us.
Sure. A lot of this is about planning and preparation. A lot of the technology, particularly around mainframes, has been in place for a long time. They typically work very well. The weakness is always when humans get involved. And so we and the banking industry needs to put processes in place to test, to do things like penetration testing and security, to make sure that best practices are being followed, correct use of passwords, correct use of system access controls and privileges, making sure that the right people have access to the right things at the right time, but not too much, not too little. They need enough to be able to do their job, but not too much privilege in order that they could break something, either maliciously or by accident. And a lot of the regulations are talking about things like stress testing. So banks are used to doing financial stress tests, but they also have to do IT and system stress tests as well to make sure that they run scenarios to say what's going to happen if one of our key data centers goes down, or what happens if there's a power outage or a flood or people are unavailable. How do we switch to a backup data center? How do we recover from backup tapes or backup storage? What are the things we can do to make sure that we have those emergency procedures in place, so that when something happens, we know what to do. Everybody's trained, everybody's got the number, they know who to call, they know where to go. Sort of simple things, but just giving organizations and the people that work there the best practices and the tools to be able to respond very quickly. Ted, I think you want to make a point.
Well, I was going to say that the Office of Comptroller of Cash here in the United States issues a business continuity handbook that goes to the CEOs of the banks in the United States that requires them to demonstrate that they can actually recover from an event, be it a major catastrophic event or an interim event, for their business continuity plan, which organizations used to do DR testing, which was a much more limited test of I could get systems to come up. Now they actually have to demonstrate that they could actually run a bank from another location with all the connectivity and services that the customers expect. And they have to do this by proving it to the OCC.
Yeah, we had to do that. We had double data centers, and we would have to fail over for 2 weeks and run on a backup data center and show the OCC that we were able to do it. Yeah, absolutely. But Priya, I think you were talking a little bit about research and talking with some of the financial services companies that BMC does business with. Are there any other aspects of mainframe strategies that they should be paying attention to help meet these challenges
Yeah.
of modernization and reliability?
Before I get to that, I just want to mention one thing, which is, Todd and Duncan were talking about recovery, and we kind of assumed, like we talked about DR, and, DR is not new for the mainframe world, right? But I think what's interesting about what we're seeing from BMC's perspective is it's not always about on-prem DR, right? So one of the things we're finding is that there are actually, because of some of these new regulations, there are actually use cases around, backing up into a cloud, for example, for your secondary storage for various reasons, partly due to DORA, requiring that physical and logical separation of your data, sometimes just to have that immutable third copy.
Hybrid cloud strategy in that case, yeah.
Yep. The OCC has been recommending since 2019 that you have a cloud strategy for your backup, so that if in the event you had to do a bare metal restart, you'd have that capability.
Yeah. And so, Eric, I think to your question, I think what we sort of tell customers to do is, first of all, probably about a third of the core systems that a bank or insurer have are sitting in a mainframe environment. And then there's additional that are probably sitting in a hybrid cloud sort of setup, right? So there's still a pretty significant footprint that has to be looked at. And the way we think about it is, listen, you can decide to modernize and transform wherever it is you want to go, but you can't sit on the sidelines, right? Because the reality is, if you have chosen to make this as a platform that is a core and somewhat strategic in terms of, it's one of the strategic platforms that you care about in your business, which is what we're hearing from these financial services companies, then what we recommend is look at it holistically across your mainframe estate. Look at your development practices, look at your application and modernization practices. What are you doing to make it easier for developers to work with the code, maintain the code, optimize, and ultimately deploy? We ask them to look at their operations. We talked about, Duncan, you mentioned how critical it is to stay up, that it's this never fail environment.
Yeah.
So we tell them to really look into that, to leverage new techniques using AI, using ML, using observability and dashboarding, quite frankly, to be able to do more faster in terms of getting to the insight that's needed to remediate the problem faster. We have a number of things that we talk to them about in the vein of compliance, security. We kind of mentioned and touched on some of those around, backup and recovery, around data protection, around security. And then, the last piece we talked to them about is their data, right? And how to keep that up and running, how to manage it. The data area is a place where there's a lot of retirements. And so one of the challenges there is just, if that DBA is retiring, how do you transfer the knowledge of the management of that DB2 or IMS database to the next generation? So that's just a preview, Eric. Probably the last thing I'll say is the other thing we're focused on is, and this is across the portfolio, how can we use AI, whether it's Gen AI, ML? We call it hybrid AI because it's AI ML, which we've already had, combined with that Gen AI, which can get you to explanation, which can get you to, creation or guidance, and ultimately even to automation. How can we leverage that across the portfolio? So we've been also starting to put out, betas for customers to try. We have product out there now customers can try called Amy Assistant, which is designed to do just that, like across the portfolio.
Yeah, we had a customer in the insurance industry who was losing their critical IMS resource, and became very compelling that expertise was going to be very difficult to replace. And so they leveraged some of our technology that has advisor technology in it, where some of that experience has been built into the product to help the next generation of IMS DBA be able to, keep up with the pace of change and apply the expertise that they personally don't have.
Yeah, it's been a while since I did anything with IMS. I did relate several examples for the book on transaction processing I wrote together with Phil Bernstein, years ago. I wanted to shift gears a little bit. You guys have started to bring up some new technologies, and I'm just noticing, I can't remember how long it's been since I first heard that the mainframe is dead, but I know it's been probably 20 or 30 years, and yet it is not dead, and it's not only not dead, if I can put it that way, but it seems to be undergoing a resurgence. The last 3 to 5 years, it really seems to me like there's been a lot of investment in mainframes, and there has been investment right along the whole time. Mainframes have been around and they've been evolving. There've been new chips, new data capabilities, new operating system capabilities, virtual machines. They run containers. You can put all kinds of stuff, Java apps on there. They've been able to do that for a while, but it seems like there's a sudden corner or maybe a tipping point has been turned with some of these latest trends around, including the mainframe's really great core capabilities into modern the application environment, including AI. What would you guys say is really been done recently to show that there's a lot of new stuff coming out, hardware and software in the mainframe area to kind of help people to take it, meet these challenges we've been talking about.
I think what's really turned the corner, in my opinion, it wasn't any one thing. It's been a combination of things. So I think that the transaction processing of the platform, the security, the resiliency, that's what people really buy into with the mainframe platform. But the challenge of agility, right? And connecting it to different things and, being able to
Yeah,
treat the platform just like
absolutely.
any other platform in your organization. So it's been a combination of factors, like you kind of said, alluded to, Eric. It's been the adoption of DevOps, which BMC is on the forefront of. It's been implementing and incorporating AI into the platform. It's been integrating into the cloud. All of these things have started to make it so that it's easier and easier for the customers to actually go and adopt some of these things because there is a huge change management component with this, right? When DevOps first came up, mainframe developers did not want to work that way, or they were very, suspect of wanting to work that way. And the most successful DevOps implementations we've seen, just as one example, is usually when, like I'm thinking of one of the bigger banks, it was when the distributed team that had already adopted DevOps brought their practices to the mainframe team because they already knew what good looked like and they were able to then work with them. So it's that cross-pollination.
We're starting to see capabilities from the distributed world come into the mainframe world, which will make it easier to solve some of those skills issues. People that are familiar with the way of doing DevOps, AI ops, the distributed world can now apply those skills to the mainframe world.
That's right.
Yeah, it's spot on because it's not the programming language that's the hurdle. It's the process for those, agile DevOps people on the distributed platforms to work on mainframe technology. I would also add that, the platform was chosen for these applications for the right reason. All the things that Priya mentioned, the scalability, the capability, the cost per transaction, the securability. But what you mentioned is sort of the wave of, I thought the mainframe was going to be dead by now. And what's really happened is,
How many times have we heard
Yeah.
this, right? And it's still not.
well, what we've heard is, I was talking to a financial services firm not that long ago who, thought they were moving all their compute to the cloud because that was going to be the answer. And when they did a conversion to one of their large applications, converted it to Java to run in the cloud, they realized it only ran slower, delivered the same functionality at a greater cost. And that's sort of what has pivoted them back to the mainframe with the realization that this is the right platform. We just need to improve our application performance. And people are now looking at using the technology that Priya was describing to help the developers evaluate the applications and then improve them appropriately.
This kind of all brings up horses for courses type of analogy for me. What do you think, Duncan?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's such a well understood, well established technology, and I guess it's like any technology. When you look at something that's been in place for a long time, diesel engines in vehicles or jet engines, things that people really depend on. When you have decades to refine them and optimize them, you learn the skills to be able to run them very, very efficiently. And people talk about making mainframes very securable. It's because they are, and it's because they're well understood. And I think the thing we encounter when we're dealing with our non-mainframe customers is just the complexity that some of these new systems introduce. And so often the weak link from a security or fraud or the perspective of bad actors is simply the complexity, the number of new things, the number of moving parts. And often the IT operations are the weak link if you're not monitoring them and understanding them correctly. Because the analogy I give to people is simply that if you've got 100 cars parked in the street, the one that's going to get stolen is usually the one that's not locked. And so when you have a lot of moving components, it's a big requirement to be able to lock all of those things down and make them secure. And in a lot of those cases, because the systems are new, the processes haven't been refined to such a degree, whereas with mainframes, they have. People understand how to run them really well, and consequently, they can run them to an incredibly high level of performance and security. So it's reliable, it's secure, and it's fast, and it can do a lot of things at the same time. So all of those things people said were good about mainframes 20 years ago are still true, even with cloud computing and even with AI.
Absolutely. We were talking about transaction processing earlier, and Transaction processing was invented on mainframes.
Yeah.
The book that I wrote covered CICS and IMS, but there was even TPF before that, which is still running in at least a dozen companies, as far as I know, still doing a great job. So mainframes, the transaction processing was invented on mainframes, and it's still the best place to do transaction processing. When you start getting into distributed environments, you start introducing latency issues, reliability issues that you don't have on the mainframe, where everything is so well controlled within a scope of environment with the processing and the data. If you have an error, and this is what transaction processing, the litmus test, the acid test, if you have a failure during a write to a database, you have to be able to recover that transaction, because you cannot have the classic, debit credit, two writes that need to be synchronized. You take money out of one account, put it in the next. Both of those have to succeed, or neither one has to succeed. And the mainframe environment is just the best at that kind of thing still. So I think we'll see the right kinds of applications being developed for the right platforms. On the other side, you've got the touch screen, usable interface on the mobile platform. That's a great place to do that, but you got to connect it up for doing your payments transactions to the mainframe, which is actually what Citi does with their Citi mobile app, as I happen to know for sure. They use the mainframe to process the consumer transactions from the mobile app, because that's still the best place to do it. It's not the best place to host a GUI, though. So when you're when you're planning out your strategy and looking at addressing a lot of the concerns and investments we've been talking about, I really think you got to look at the best place to do the right kind of processing, and plan it out that way. You've got to get the mainframe out of the closet, out of the back room, and into the modern world, and get to play its correct role in the larger scheme of things.
Eric, I think that's kind of what the data is telling us too. So to kind of, to Duncan and Ted and your points as well, that what the data is telling us from the survey, the mainframe survey, is that actually 89% of banking, financial services, those types of companies are either increasing or maintaining their investment in the platform. So 42% are increasing their investment, and then the other 47% are maintaining. So no, the mainframe is not dead, but I'm also telling you this is what the data is telling us. So we can speak anecdotally about client examples, but that across the industry, that's what folks are saying.
Well, I'll throw something else out. With the new capabilities on the mainframe, recently you've heard some announcements from the IBM. It's the hardware manufacturer of improved chips, improved speeds, improved capacity. And you can run virtual machines, you can run Linux operating system, you can run Java, you can run Docker containers very effectively on the mainframe. What do you think about somebody who is looking at their existing mainframe investment within the context of the overall landscape that they're trying to adjust some of these requirements in, because regulatory and security data affects everything. It's not just one platform. All of them are impacted. What about the case where somebody is investing in the mainframe for improving the efficiency and the capacity for payments, low value, high volume payments, need to invest a bit more capacity? Should they be thinking about other applications if they're going to add to the capacity of the mainframe, take advantage of some of these new technologies on the hardware side and the software side? Should they be thinking about new applications for the mainframe as well? Is that going to be cost effective? Is that going to give a good return on investment? Is that going to give them the reliability and security they might need? We were talking about horses for courses. Do we have applications still that somebody might be thinking about that needs those kinds of capabilities? The increased capacity and capability for the mainframe maybe it does make sense to think about putting some of them there. What do you guys think? Ted, to start with you this time.
I would lean into the conversation around data, right? MIPS are growing at maybe a linear pace, but data grows exponentially. And then the power of that data is what people are trying to unlock. And historically, unlocking mainframe data is very expensive, both from a compute and from a time and effort exercise. We've developed technology that allows you to use a Java-based application, so reducing the amount of compute required to unlock that mainframe data and deliver it in an S3 format to other tools for doing, you mentioned analytics, right? You creating an immutable backup for secure and recoverability reasons. So changing the way you do mainframe storage is one of the ways you could unlock the power of the data you've been storing on the mainframe for the last 50 years. So I think that's a perfect example of a new capability that's evolved for the mainframe is actually going to help extend the importance and life of the mainframe.
So going forward, people really need to be looking at how to do that in a more efficient way with new technologies. Priya, what do you see?
Well, I can just share, what I've heard from customers, which is that they're most excited about the AI features of the new, some of the newer AI features on the platform, especially the fraud detection one, because of course, Duncan, you talked a lot about securities and payments, right? And so in transaction fraud detection, like if you could actually score every transaction and not just a sample of maybe 10% or 2% of every transaction and not have a massive hit on the response time in terms of the customer experience, that is something that the Z16 enables customers to do. So I personally, like when we are talking to customers, especially in the financial services industry, definitely seeing a lot more interest in fraud detection, using the platform for those kinds of analytics. And then also, on the back end, all of the analytics that go into the business analyst activities, like Ted was mentioning. So,
Yeah, analytics is another thing you have to think comprehensively and coherently about across the estate.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my in my previous life prior to BMC, I worked a lot in fraud detection and cyber and analytics generally. And one of the hardest things was actually getting the people who ran the mainframe to give us access to some of that data. That was quite hard to come by, and a lot of those organizations didn't have access to some of the things that we've got access to now. So it's a great set of capabilities that we have access to, being able to look at a transaction in real time, score it for fraud, score it for cyber threats, or to apply some kind of business analytics against it, do some kind of customer scoring. That's incredibly powerful, and we've got that now. It's not something that's going to happen in the future, which gets a lot of value out of the platform for our customers.
Yeah, I was talking to a vice president of a payment processing company not that long ago, and back to predicting the capability and the performance of that system is critical. He said his competition is just the next card in your wallet, right? So if I use a card and I'm at Starbucks and it doesn't go through, well, I might try one more time, but if it doesn't go through again, I'm just going to pull out the next card, and you know what? He just lost that chance at that transaction, and maybe all the future transactions that I ever may make because I've switched cards without even realizing it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, good point. The people are judging. What we used to say at Citi when I was there, we started a mobile first initiative, meaning design the apps for the customers for the mobile platform first. And we would say, this is how customers are judging us now, by their mobile app. They used to judge us by our wonderful bank facilities. They would go in and talk to a teller. There was a vault in the back to show how secure the money was. Everything was beautifully done. And you felt like going into the bank was a place where you could go and feel safe about your money. But now nobody goes to the bank, and they judge the bank by their mobile app and how useful it is, what a great customer experience is. And to your point, Ted, if you don't give that customer experience, they're going to go to someone else who will. And there's a lot of competition on that area. Again, backed up by mainframes, isn't it that? So that's one of the big driving forces for the API modernization there. Let me maybe get on the other side of this coin, or the other edge of the sword, perhaps, because we're talking a lot about great stuff that we should be thinking about for the future. We should think about today and today's landscape. But the skills issue has been touched on before, but I want to come back to that in a little more detail, because that's kind of the other side of the sword. The mainframe has all these great capabilities because of its unique architecture that stood the test of time, and as Duncan has said, been refined over the years to be an incredibly well-performing, resilient, secure platform. But it is a unique platform compared to, or it's as different, at least I should say, compared to distributed and cloud, each of which have their own skills challenges. But now mainframe is coming more to the fore, and we need to do more with it. We need to meet all these challenges for the business today and going forward, regulatory, new revenues coming in, competition for customers. How can we advise our banking and finance mainframe customers about this skills issue that they're facing when the workforce is probably not as trained on mainframes as they used to be? I think, Priya, you mentioned it at first, so
Yeah.
over to you.
Well, there's a couple ways to think of the skills challenge, Eric. I think first of all, there is a mainframe skills council, an initiative that is across the industry ecosystem that includes clients, it includes vendors. I sit on the council, as do many of my peers in other companies, and that council is designed to create, best practices around skills management, hiring, onboarding, motivating, all of those things. So there's great programs that are, led through the industry to kind of help the hiring managers with the challenges that they have. And, if there's anyone listening who's curious about those things, who hasn't been clued in on it, I'm happy to give them a little bit of a tutorial. But I think from the software side of things, what's been really interesting for folks is one, I mean, I hate to say it, but there are still a lot of people using green screen. So moving off of green screen towards dashboards, UI, GUI-based activities, not having to click through multiple screens to get to what you need to do. And then the other is Gen AI. And in my opinion, Gen AI is something that can really address the tribal knowledge problem. The fact that every one of our customers will tell us that at least a third or maybe even a half of their staff for Mainframe is walking out the door in the next 5 years, retiring. So that tribal knowledge can be codified. It can be encapsulated into an AI trained system that, people can access. Simple example would be opening up a COBOL code base and saying, I have no clue what this is, and being able to use Gen AI and automatically get a clear explanation of what the code is so that there's less fear of, having to go in and make changes to it.
That's so important. But are you seeing similar or anything else out there that's breaking?
Yeah, just to accentuate the point that Priya was making, that there is a awareness that there is a skills shortage, but there are universities who are offering mainframe curriculum, some with whom we support by providing software for their curriculum. And those organizations are creating the next generation of mainframer. We also have education capabilities within BMC to help, develop the next generation of mainframer as well. And it's really about treating the platform like any other platform, as opposed to thinking it has to be different. Sure, there are nuances to it, but you're still going to maintain it. You're still going to secure it. You're still going to monitor it so that, it's the same basic things that need to be done for it, just with slightly different tooling.
Yeah, I remember this myself for my first encounters with mainframes years ago. I just had to learn the JCL, and COBOL programming was pretty much the same, but the way that you set up and ran the programs was a little different. But as you said, it's the characteristics of a platform. It's not that hard to learn. Duncan, maybe I'll ask you, and maybe we'll close it off here with the last comment. What do you say?
Sure. I'll just lean in on Priya's comment. I think Gen AI is the exciting thing for me as someone who's not the greatest coder on the planet. Just thinking back to the hours I spent trying to debug code when I was at university. So being able to use Gen AI to look at the code that I'm writing and not just to audit it to tell me whether it's going to work, whether it's good, but also whether it's secure, whether there are vulnerabilities, but also to suggest ways I can make my code run faster. Because I think a lot of people can pick up a book, write some code and get the job done, but then it takes a really experienced developer to be able to write the same code to run really fast and with all the controls in place to make it really safe. So having a piece of technology sitting, looking over my shoulder, doing that for me, taking a job that would take hours or days and getting it done in less than hours is phenomenal. So for me, that's the exciting thing. And that's what probably will help on the human side. Maybe we'll be able to get the same job done with less people or just use the same number of people we've got, but just do a better job, make things more secure, make the code faster, find ways to make mainframes go even better. That for me, that's the exciting thing. So the technology is going at a phenomenal pace. I think Gen AI, we've only just seen the beginning and it's only going to get better. So yeah, I think if we had this conversation in a year's time, there'll be things we haven't even thought of now.
Oh, yeah, that's really excellent. I think that's a great place to leave it, our discussion. Looking forward to more and more assistance from our Gen AI bots, if you will, and colleagues and part of the industry. So thanks, Priya, Duncan, Ted.
Thank you.
Great conversation.
Thanks, Eric.
Great conversation. Matt, let's send it back over to you.
Okay, yes, it was a fantastic conversation. And again, thanking everyone, including you, Eric, for being here and for leading the conversation. Thank you also to everyone listening. Please be sure to check out the show notes for links to further insights on this topic, including a blog post by Priya that we published recently. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time on the Modern Mainframe. You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's intelligent Z optimization and transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in mainframe DevOps, data, operations, security, and cloud. You've never mainframed like this.